in this diagram, you can see that we have this config server right here, and this is mainly for pulling out configuration. Now, if you're using Spring Boot, you'll often see people using the config server, but I'm going to tell you that it's best not to use it. So let me actually first show you what Spring Config is, and then I'm going to tell you why you shouldn't use it. And within Spring Cloud, you can see that we have Spring Cloud Config, and Cloud Config provides server and client side support for externalized configuration in a distributed system. In here, you can see that if you have your microservices and they want to pull out environment specific configuration, they can do it through this config server in here. So you don't have the configuration within these services themselves, but it's externalized through this config server. Now, this config server serves all the configs through HTTP. So it's actually running a web server and then serving all the configuration for these microservices in here. Now you can see that if this, for example, was to go down, then you are in serious trouble. So if I put this back, and basically it's best for you not to use this. And that's because we are using Kubernetes. Often if you build these microservices, most of the times you will deploy these applications to Kubernetes. So this is the Java stack these days. And within Kubernetes, there is something called config maps. And within the official documentation for Kubernetes, there is this config maps page. And by the way, I'm going to leave this link under the description of this video so you can follow along. But in here, they say a config map is an API object used to store non-confidential data in key value pairs. Pods can consume config maps as environment variables, command line arguments, or as configuration files in a volume. So this is the perfect scenario for us to use config maps. And the benefit of using config maps is that we don't have to manage this ourselves. So here, one less server to manage. And you can imagine if you have thousands and thousands of microservices, then you need to make sure that your config server is resilient, so on and so forth. And basically, we can remove all of this from our concern and focus on building our domain. So each of these microservices, and we let the configuration be taken care by Kubernetes, which is what you should be doing. Let Kubernetes manage the configuration for you. And within Spring Cloud, so there is Kubernetes, have a look, Spring Cloud Kubernetes, and I already have this link right here. And if I click on it, in here, section 14, you can see that they give you a explanation of what a config server is. But what I want to show you is that it says that this component is completely optional, right? So usually the reason why people use config server is because it allows you to store configuration within Git, for example, but please don't do it that way. And instead, so in here, section 5, Kubernetes property source implementations, you can see that it says the most common approach to configuring your Spring Boot application is to create an application.properties or YAML, or the application dash the profile, as you saw throughout this course. Now it says using a config map property source, Kubernetes provides a resource named config map, which I've just showed you, to externalize the parameters to pass to your application in the form of key value pairs or embedded application.properties or YAML. And then it says the Spring Cloud Kubernetes config project makes Kubernetes config map instances available during application bootstrap and triggers hot reloading of beans or Spring context when changes are detected or observed within your config map instances. So you can see that there is no need for us to manage our own config server, and we let Kubernetes, which is amazing at what it does, deal with stuff that we really don't care about. And for configuration, there is no need for you to spin up a config server because, as I said, you don't want to manage it. And the more microservices you have, the more difficult it is for you or your ops team to manage infrastructure. So please just use config maps. If I scroll down, you can see that they have an example here. So basically, here, have a look. So you can have a config map like that, and then you specify the size. So this is in properties format, or have a look. So individual properties work fine for most cases. However, sometimes embedded YAML. So you've seen application.yaml right here, and have a look. Basically, this is a Kubernetes resource, and then you can pass a data. This is the name of the file, and this denotes the actual data right here, and this is the file. And then you can basically mount this as a volume. So again, I've got a course on Kubernetes teaching you everything about config maps and whatnot. So I highly recommend you to have a look at that. But what I want to tell you is not to spin up a config server. Please don't do it. And as you saw with Eureka Server as well, we basically eliminated all of this. And you can see that now is less to worry about. If you have any questions, drop me a message. Otherwise, let's move on.